we have Nadia Ahmad here on, and she is many things. And I'm going to try to get through this, Nadia, without struggling over everything you've done. She is an author, an attorney, a law professor, and an environmental justice advocate, also a visiting professor at Yale Law School, and also an associate professor at Barry University School of Law over in Orlando. So Nadia, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks so much for doing all you've done in the progressive movement. Can you talk about the 2020 Sanders campaign, whether it's in Florida or in general? Why do you feel it didn't work out?
Yeah, I wanted to back up even before becoming a Sanders delegate. I worked as also signed on as a volunteer Bernie victory captain. And it was really the first time I felt a part of this country. Like I took ownership in being American, as you know, as well as not feeling othered in the ways I had felt before. And it was really because of so much anti-Muslim bias during the Trump administration, just so much racism, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I helped, with doing phone banking as well as door knocking for Senator Sanders. And we would also have these really large Zoom meetings. This was even before the pandemic started, with hundreds, thousands of people on it. And so my daughter, who was 5 years old at the time, she saw it. And she said, I want to be a victory captain as well. And so she also went through the training and was trained and certified as a Bernie victory captain. So it was really a family effort to help Senator Sanders get elected. But to your question as to what didn't work. And so I think there was some issues with coordination, but I also think that I think that people weren't ready for this large movement. And I think that we have to be ready to move in small steps, but also be willing to take big leaps when they come. So for example, we've recently elected our first open socialist in the state of Florida. And so this is really like we're making changes. And so I think we have to look out not only for 2020, but keep an eye out for 2024 as well as 28, because it's a long game. And even if you look, Senator Sanders, how long he has been fighting and how much of his life and energy he has put into this movement.
Right. So I want to go into the campaign a little bit. The things that kind of bothered me with the senator was he kept calling Joe Biden his friend. When you're running against somebody, whether I'm running against you, Nadia, or whatever, we're running for that office. We're not friends. We leave it all on the field, regardless of that. So I thought that was a problem. And they would ask him during the debates saying, do you think Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump? And he said, yes. I personally believe he should have said no. And here's why. He's against Medicare for all. And you could go down the list of why Joe Biden is terrible.
Yeah, and so in Florida, I mean, you really have to recognize this is the swamp, and so it can be thought of, from a negative level as a swamp, but it's also considered, like, from an ecological standpoint, a wetlands. And so there's a different type of ecosystem here than you would find in other places, and at the same time, that playing dirty yield results in Florida. We even saw that not just in the 2020 primary, but even in the 2018 gubernatorial race with Andrew Gillum, which is playing dirty yields results. And so being a nice guy won't get you to the finish line in Florida. And so I think that there has to be an understanding of that. And at the same time, you want to maintain your ethics and morals as a part of this. But I think that there needed to be like more hard hitting on the issues and really being able to define what differentiates the Sanders versus the Biden campaign. But I think what we're also left with is an area where the Sanders campaign really helped in politics and really changed the directionality of it was about the dirty money that is in politics. And so especially in Florida, it's very difficult to win a statewide election without support of big agriculture, as well as these large utility companies, because they have a lot of sway in the government. You also see this happening in other states as well. For example, in Virginia, with the Democrats faced heavy losses in that state as well. It's because they're not willing to stand strong on issues. And so if there's a lot of waffling that happens, that's where we lose respect, and we also lose our own momentum that we have built up.
Nadia Ahmad here on Fire Breathing Rob. Nadia, I want to talk about this since we're just in Florida right now, talking about the Florida politics. Obviously, big race next year for the U.S. Senate against Marco Rubio, but I more so want to dive into kind of that Republican light issue with Charlie Crist and even, Nikki Fried, who has her own issues with that. We don't really see a progressive in that race. Annette Tadeo has came in. She seems like somewhat of a progressive. You can kind of, I don't know much about her personally, so you can kind of, talk to us about that. But what do you see in that 2022 primary for Florida governor? Charlie Crist seems like the Joe Biden pick. Um, I feel like Nikki Fried, she did win that race. That's pretty, tough to win in Florida, but she doesn't really seem like a progressive. And I don't really know much about Annette Tadeo. I looked at her website. There's not really much on this. So, as a progressive and people listening in Florida that are progressives, who should they be looking at in that race?
So, for example, in the gubernatorial race and even in the Senate race, I don't see a strong candidate, especially for us as progressives to gravitate towards.
Sure.
And so, right now, as progressives, we've been focusing more on local and county elections. And the problem that you also see with that is that you're not going to have a clear front runner as well. And so, you're going to end up with a candidate who is really not the most spectacular, maybe actually a more lackluster candidate. And so for us, I think like unless we see like an emergence of a new candidate, we have to take the candidates that we are left with and have them really work to improve further. And so what I think really needs to happen is that they need to embrace their base, which is the progressive base, and that's how the Tea Party, that's how Marco Rubio rose, is because they embraced the base. And so for Democrats, they're really shunning the progressive wing, like that left flank that they have. And if they're willing to do that, they're going to constantly run into to trouble. I also saw, for example, during the Gillum campaign and even now, currently with internal DNC politics, like there's high levels of xenophobia, Islamophobia, as well as misogyny. And so for them to really work to overcome that, they have to have some hard conversations. I also did work with an organization called Supermajority, which works to empower women in the electoral process and helping them to get out the vote for women, especially women of color. And one of the trainings that we do is about having deep conversations like we're having right now about what led us to the problems that we have. And I have noticed, especially in Florida, there's this high immigrant populations that we have the Democratic line in Florida among the establishment Democrats is essentially the Republican line when it comes to immigration. And so if you don't have pathways to citizenship for both documented and undocumented immigrants in the state, you're going to lose traction because people vote not only on party, but also on issues. And so you have to build a campaign that attracts these specific issues that people are interested in. Another thing that we saw, for example, when we were doing GOTV campaigns for the presidential election, is that there was large swaths of the community and different groups that were left out of the process altogether. And so I think that's a deep problem. They didn't include any Asian American Pacific Islander voices. They didn't include Muslim voices. They didn't include South Asian voices. They also didn't include progressive voices on the campaign. If you wanted to get involved with the Biden coordinated campaign, and if you are from any of these 3-4 groups, you were basically left to fend for yourself and do the work on your own because the coordinator wouldn't want to coordinate with you. And so what we decided to do is that the organizing that we had done for the Sanders campaign, like we didn't want to face another Trump presidency. And so we organized in 3 specific counties. Like, we looked at the data from about 67 counties, and we found that if we target these 3 counties, because we were only 4 people that we were working with, and how we would expand our base further is that these 3 counties had large immigrant, Muslim and South Asian populations. And if we just focused on those 3 specific demographics, we could flip those counties. And so, we said, okay, fine, we'll let coordinated Joe Biden campaign, let them do whatever they want, let FDP do whatever they want. We will just phone bank and target these 3 counties and these 3 specific communities. And so both of those 3 counties, in addition to what the local county was doing, the coordinator and FDP had essentially neglected these 3 areas. So in coordination with the work that we were doing, through our activism, we were able to flip all 3 of those counties blue. And even though the rest of Florida was essentially a bloodbath, all 3 of those counties flipped. And the first one was Duval County, which for the first time since 1976 voted for a Democratic presidential candidate. Seminole County, which was voted for a Democratic presidential candidate for the first time since 1948. And then in Pinellas County was won only by 1,300 votes. And so we saw, like, this is a winning formula. If you can see that you can value immigrant voices as well as value progressive voices, because we were organizing as progressives, because we don't have the luxury of just sitting back and taking another Republican win at the state legislature. Like, we are the communities that are most impacted by Republican legislation.
What is your opinion on FDP, and what is your opinion also on Florida just focusing basically, as far as Democrats, on those 3 counties in general?
Yeah, and if I can, just pardon my French, but we had our ass handed to us in the last election. Like, we should have some humility in how badly we lost, and we don't see any of that coming from the FDP. There is just no humility. Like, it's basically it's almost as if it's run by mob bosses in terms of the way that they want to coordinate issues. And so for me, like, the way I feel like going into some of these FDP meetings is like it's going into a meeting with where everybody's decided on what they want to do, and you're just basically there to say yes, nod your head, and if you are not like the bobblehead, then you get called out. But at the same time, we don't come to any type of consensus. So most of the activism work that I do is in environmental justice, but most of my law practice experience was in business and corporate law. I also teach business organizations, so I have a lot of experience in that. And so some of the basic issues of accountability, corporate transparency, we have none of that. There is no way any type of organization could operate the way the FDP does and get away with it. And it's because we have this culture and norm of accepting mediocrity and loss that we are able to go ahead as an FDP and move forward. And if the FDP really worked well, there would be no place for somebody like me to be on it. Because it would be essentially run by the establishment. And so even if they were to have the FDP be completely establishment based, there's still space for progressives because they don't operate very well as they would in, say, places where they're more established in the Democratic field. And so I think that creates both a frustration, but I think it also creates an opportunity for us as progressives to organize and work within the space. I don't want to just make it easy for them to do whatever they want to do. I think it's important for us to call out the behavior, but also to work with them to try to improve to the extent that we can.
Who do you see as far as Democrats that could rise up the ranks? I think, like I said, and I hate to keep throwing Anna's name out there, but I think she has some establishment support along with that big progressive backing. So I think, like, she was looking at running for governor, she didn't take the dive in, but I think it's someone like her that can, really has that progressive base and is a progressive, but can nab some of those establishment Democrats and even some Republicans are voting for Anna too in Orlando.
Yeah, so when we had the DNC convention last summer, I was
Mhm.
introducing Anna Eskamani as the next state governor for Florida. And so I think she just wasn't ready for whatever reason to really take the dive to
Mhm.
make that leap. And I think that she would have more support. But I think that there's this problem with once you get involved in politics, you also want to stay in politics as well. And so seeing that there's a certain safety in a certain position, and when the whole party is essentially very compromised, I think it's hard for to take that leap. And so that's why I'm hopeful that there are other candidates that will be emerging.
Mhm.
And I think that people have to be willing to take the risks that are associated with it. So, for example, even within college Democrats, I've seen, especially organizing within the state of Florida, that they've been, getting more involved, and I think that they should stay involved. I mean, if we want to have strong progressives like they have in other parts of the country, it's a matter of just not giving up. And I think seeing an opportunity and moving forward with it is what we need to do. And there's this idea, especially like in thinking about strategy, is like when you have no way out, like you're surrounded on all sides, where everybody is kind of coming in on you, your solution is not to retreat, but really to go in deeper. And I think that's what we need to do, is to really go in deeper, especially on the advocacy and work that we do for particular progressive causes. We have to go in deeper, and to raise more awareness, especially even to pass this massive plan for Build Back Better. We cannot let Representative Stephanie Murphy hold that plan hostage. And so we have to definitely keep pushing and advocating on these issues, but we also need to really encourage others as well to get involved with this process, because if we just hang back and like complaining about it can only do so much. We really have to put in the work. I mean, I also serve on my county Democratic party, and so sometimes I don't feel like welcome and respected there, but at the same time, like I'm there, like whether they like it or not, or whether even I like being there or not, I'm still there. And so I think we have to kind of establish our presence, and still continue to be involved.
Nadia Ahmad here on Fire Breathing Rob. As we move toward the end of the interview with the last few questions and some audience questions, I want to talk about the progressive movement in 2021. We obviously, you did speak a little bit about this with the November elections. We talked about, you know, in Tampa Bay and that big win for the city council as far as the socialists winning in Florida, which is basically unheard of. We saw Indian Walton, who was, really got all this money thrown against her in Buffalo. But we have saw, like you said, some progressives win in these county city races. What do you see as far as the future, as of November 2021 of progressives? A lot of progressives are down on the movement though, because they're mad at people like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, Ro Khanna too, because these people kind of gave up, voted for that infrastructure bill, and they still haven't passed the Build Back Better. You just spoke about Stephanie Murphy's in the way, Josh Gottheimer. There's a lot of Democrats that are in the way of this bill passing, and President Manchin and President Sinema too are in the way of this passing. So what is your take on the progressives? And do you think progressives such as us should be mad at these progressives in Congress because they did vote for that infrastructure bill when they kept saying they were going to hold the line and not vote for it until that Build Back Better did get passed?
So what I see is that we have to stay mad, because if we accept it the same way that they accept it, it's like as if we've given in. We're
Right.
there to hold them accountable for what they actually promised. And so I think that there's a large momentum against them for various issues, but we have to really keep pushing them, the same way that the right really forces the GOP as well. Like we still have to force them as well. And I think that the stronger we are in that, in terms of what is happening. And so, for example, we recently had the COP 26 meeting. And so a lot of that is really a green energy bonanza and climate finance. But those, like 2/3 of the world, don't have food to eat. They don't even have shelter. And so how are we going to be talking about climate emissions 5 years, 10 years down the line when people are going to be flooded, will like lose their houses? And so, I mean, just completely different conversations that happen at high levels and in the halls of power versus what is happening on the ground as well as on Main Street.
And with this last answer, we talked about this. We said that, Joe Biden's going to be 82. He's not, there's a lot of Democrats that are not really happy. I think they just came out with a poll that like 45 to 50% of Democrats don't want Joe Biden or Kamala Harris to run for re-election. What do you think? You're inside the DNC. You talk to a lot of people, activists on the ground, activists all over the country. What are you hearing from people? Do you believe Joe Biden's going to run for re-election? Do you believe it's Kamala Harris? Is it Pete Buttigieg? Will Liz Warren step in? If Liz Warren steps in, she's definitely got my vote 100%, unless there's somebody more progressive than her. Who do you see? Is Stacey Abrams? Who do you see in this for
So, I
2020?
mean, I think the Democrats are going to run with Joe Biden, but
Oh,
I think
gosh.
Kamala Harris, I think she definitely wants it. So if she can get any way in, I think she's going to go for it as well. I wouldn't count on her to follow party norms, because if she wants it, she's going to go for it. But if it does open it up, then I think it'll open it up a lot wider as well.
No progressive then, before we hang up.
Um, I mean, I think they will run, but I just don't see a way forward for them right now. I think they really need to build up. I think in 2028 and beyond, you may have a chance for a progressive, but right now you're just looking at getting crushed in 2022 without some real honest assessment. And then in 2024, they're really going to be hanging by a thread.
All right, Nadia. Hey, thanks so much for your time. Let's do this again down the road. I appreciate you.
Hey, thank you.